Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second week of our writing seminar. We send you a few emails that with more information about the protocol, what we are doing, and we also have the good to see you, Venkata. We also have the Facebook group. The Facebook group is for this group. You can go ask your questions there and talk to others there. Good morning, Salma. And I know I've been getting some of your questions in different by emails or by DMs and in different areas, and it's a little bit difficult to get them all, but I'm working on that. Good morning, Kondal. So I'm very happy that you guys are here. If you're not getting my emails, if something is not clear, please let us know so we can work on that. If you guys don't have any questions, we can just jump right there to the webinar today with Dr. Prager.
Awesome. Yeah, good morning, everyone. This will be probably a bit of a lighter webinar than previous, but we want to have lots of time for questions. I just echo what Jen says, like we're really available to answer questions on protocols or writing or tips. But if you post in the Facebook group, that's the only place I can access them, and I'm checking that kind of daily and seeing what I can do. So please feel free to comment in the Facebook group, and we'll get to it right away. So today we're going to be talking about let me pull up here. Oh gosh, this is in the way. One second. Today we're going to be talking about writing an introduction for a research protocol. And I would say that this also very much applies to writing a manuscript introduction. And one of the things that we talked about when I was talking about why write a really good protocol is your protocol actually becomes your manuscript for the most part, particularly your introduction and your methods. And so this introduction that you write for your protocol will be the introduction for your manuscript, and it's worth spending some time to really get it right. Now, for those of you who didn't have a chance to access the manuscript templates that you can use kind of throughout this webinar series to help build your protocol from scratch, if you scan this QR code, you can get them for free, access them from the Google Drive, and then once you download them, you can then pick whatever study type you want, observational study, a survey study, a randomized controlled trial, and use that to start writing your protocol. And then also, if any of you are interested in using kind of a AI writing assistant, we are in a beta for the AI Word plugin. We haven't released it to all of our beta users yet, but if this is something that's interest to you, we can add you to the beta list. It's something that we're trying to bake as much of these lessons that I'm talking about here into the actual tool itself, so that unlike ChatGPT or other tools where you might have variable quality of output, we're trying to really standardize and improve this for users, particularly for clinical researchers like yourselves. So when I think about writing an introduction and the purpose of a background or an introduction section, you're really trying to set the stage for why the reader should care about your research. It's not just about providing facts in the background. You're trying to make it so that the reader from the first part of it understands why research is needed, understands why your research specifically is needed, and is left finishing the introduction excited to read the rest of the manuscript. It's really like a story in many ways. And stories have been around for tens of thousands of years, if not longer. Initially oral tradition, but now also like written tradition and audiobooks and movies. But really, humans connect with stories. And stories all have a common structure. They have some sort of problem that exists that the heroes or the protagonists are going to have to overcome. There's going to be some barrier, like a gap, that the hero has to like the cross
The
to get to the other
challenge.
side. And then there's also going to be then the hook or something that really draws you in and makes you want to keep reading. And I would say that an introduction can follow that structure, and that's how I write my introductions. And so we're going to go through what that actually looks like. But I would say that in general, I try to keep my introduction short for the most part, typically one page double spaced. I often aim for only 3 or 4 paragraphs. That way it's really, really concise. In my first paragraph, I'm trying to outline the problem. My second paragraph, I'm trying to outline kind of the gap in the literature. And then the third paragraph is the hook. What are we going to be solving, and what are the objections for our research? And so let's go through an example here. And I'm just going to quickly pull in an example manuscript here and try to demonstrate this. And then we'll go through it in more detail as well. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or use the QA function here. All right. So this was a protocol that we had initially written, and then we turned into a manuscript looking at some of the medical legal complications of using ultrasound in hospitals. And so in yellow here, you can see the problem. And so the problem is that point of care ultrasound is being used commonly. It's really safe and it helps people. And it's being integrated more and more into undergraduate and post-medical education. And it's being endorsed by multiple societies. So far, this sounds like what's the problem here? Well, despite it being very useful, there's a risk that the rapid uptake of kind of adoption of point of care ultrasound may outpace best practices to safeguard patients. So that's a problem. We have this widespread adoption that maybe is actually happening a little bit too quickly. Now the gap, well, there's been medical legal analyses that can help promote patient safety, and using these medical legal analyses, we can identify causes of adverse events and develop strategies. But the gap is that currently the POCUS medical legal literature has not identified where any cases resulted in civil legal action, but instead cases have only resulted from failing to perform POCUS. So maybe there's a gap here. But these studies, and this is the gap, are limited by small sample size, not comprehensive legal databases, and differences in legal systems between countries, really leaving an important question or a gap for physicians performing POCUS in Canada. And then the hook is, well, what were we going to do? Well, we were going to study this massive closed case kind of medical legal repository and describe the frequency and nature of medical legal cases relating to ultrasound, as well as strategies and contributing factors, which hasn't been addressed before. And so this is kind of how I really try to think of my problem gap hook for my introduction. And so I'll pause here for a second and see if there's any questions here. Can I summarize what has been talked about already? I will not do that. We've just been talking about introductions. What if you were on the team that wrote the I don't know if I totally understand that second question about the team there, and then okay, so the question from Rena about the relationship between the introduction and the research protocol. So the introduction is just one part of a research protocol. A research protocol, if you go back and review the recording from last time, has multiple different sections. You have the administrative section, and then introduction, methods, results, and so this is just talking about how do you set up your research protocol for other people. All right. Perfect. All right. Well, let's go back in and actually dive a little bit deeper into how does this work in practice here. Perfect. So how I generate a research introduction for a research protocol is I start by doing a literature review. And then based on the literature review, I start putting in bullet points for the problem I'm trying to define, the gap in the literature, and what my hook is going to be. I then take that and write that, and I'll show you how I use large language models to help make this more efficient for myself. And then I review it and add citations in. So the traditional methods to do literature review is you go to PubMed, you do Google searches, you use a librarian, etc. Perhaps if this is an area of expertise you already have, then you already will know some of the studies, but it's always good to make sure that you have the most up-to-date statistics, for example, if you're trying to find the problem. When I'm trying to define the problem, that's where a lot of the literature review comes in, because you want to make readers care about it. So you want to define things like how prevalent is the disease that you're studying? How does it impact people? How costly is it to our healthcare system? All of these things will help define the scope of the problem, because if it's a problem that really doesn't impact many people, and if it's a problem that doesn't impact patients very much, the reader probably isn't going to care that you're doing research on it. But if you define that diabetes is one of the most common complications and it results in premature death and it's one of the leading causes of preventable death and like and then people are like, all right, like this is something that we really need to care about. So one of the newer tools for doing literature reviews that I actually really like is called SciSpace. And so if you go to SciSpace, you can, so this was the paper that we just saw the protocol for. So what are the medical legal risks of point of care ultrasound? And you search, and very quickly you actually get a pretty good literature review just with some papers and kind of key summary points. So as you scroll down here, you can see that there's a bunch of different papers, and then you get these kind of like insights into them. And so it identified the paper that we published, but also a lot of other potential papers that may or may not be relevant. I think increasingly there's going to be more and more tools to help quickly do literature searches, and so SciSpace is one that I really like, and I'd encourage you to check out. So what I do when I'm actually writing down the bullet points for writing a protocol is I actually put the 3 headings down and I make specific bullet points. And if there's a citation relevant to one of the bullet points, so let's say I said that 50 physicians a year are sued in the US using point of care ultrasound. So I would put that under the problem and I would put a reference next to that. And so every piece of bullet that needs to be cited here, or every bullet point that needs to be cited, I try to add the citation in. Because what we're going to see when we're using AI to help write some of our introductions is that AI is very good at summarizing existing information and turning that into clear, legible paragraphs, but it's not so great at coming up with new information and reviewing the literature itself. And it may actually produce what we call hallucinations, where it makes up a reference that doesn't even exist. And so I really try to be explicit in this stage and put bullet points. What are the things that go into the problem? What actually is the gap that we're trying to solve? And then what is the hook? What is our study going to do? And how is it going to really solve that problem and address that gap? And so I kind of would go through and do this. And then what I would do is one, you could just write it, which is what we traditionally would do. But now in the era of large language models is you could use some sort of large language model. This is ChatGPT, but you could use our writing app, ReSubWrite. You could use Cloud. You could use really whatever tool you want. And I would put a prompt, something like, let's write an introduction following the problem gap hook approach for a scientific paper on the medical legal risks of point of care ultrasound. Here are the points I have for each. Please use the active voice, which is important. Avoid the use of M dashes, which are those annoying horizontal dashes that ChatGPT puts in all the time, and write it with a logical flow. I always tell it to avoid hyperbolic language, things like transformative, because immediately that sounds like it is AI driven. And then I copy and paste the actual problem, gap, and hook points I make, and then let it turn that together into a first draft, at least, of the problem, gap, hook. Now, if you just ask a large language model to write an introduction, it does a very, very poor job. But if you give it a predefined kind of format that you want, with a problem, gap, hook, it should be 3 paragraphs, it should be this length, it actually does a pretty good job at getting you a first draft. Now, I see a question about what's the advantage of using SciSpace versus PubMed. There is no advantage. PubMed is manual. You put in a search and you pull in a bunch of different papers. SciSpace is sometimes nice because you can kind of put more natural language like research questions in, and then it will pull other relevant papers. So it's less keyword driven and more kind of semantic based on what you mean. But there's no advantage to one or the other. So I'll pause here and just look at some of the questions and see if there's any questions you have. How many literature articles do you recommend while finding the importance of the topic? Like a minimum number. A great question. I don't think that there is a specific minimum number, but you want to make sure that you understand kind of the breadth of the literature. So if it's an area of research that you have a lot of expertise in because you've been publishing in that field for a long time, you probably know the vast majority of the literature already. So adding a few more updated papers is probably a good idea. But if this is an area that you don't know much about, you might have to review dozens, if not 30, 40, 50 papers to really understand what's been written out there already and what is the problem you're trying to solve and what's the gap. Because if you don't identify a true gap that you can solve in your research, why would anyone care about it? If that gap has already has already been solved by somebody else. So I would spend more time if you're new to that area than if you've been researching it for a while. All right. So, and again, a bit of a kind of shout out here. One of the things we're really trying to do with our word plugin that we're working on, the resub right, is take all of the things that you saw going into the prompt, active voice, avoid using hyperbolic languages, avoid em dashes, really kind of focusing on best research structure and embedding that into the model that we're using so that hopefully academics can use it to really write with really, really high quality. So we're trying to make a really academic focused writing assistant. And so again, if you want to be one of the first users to check it out and to play with it and give us feedback for free, of course, please feel free to sign up. We'd love to have you. All right. So how should we use AI writing assistants like ChatGPT or Claude or ResubWrite really effectively? And so the do's are spend time writing detailed prompts. Things to include when you're doing academic writing are use active voice whenever possible. So instead of the data were analyzed, we analyze the data. Active voice makes your research more accessible and readable for the most part. Avoid very hyperbolic terms, so things like transformative or incredible. Actually, that's not a very hyperbolic word, but there's a few ChatGPT specific hyperbolic words that it loves, and it very quickly gives it an AI written flavor. If you're using AI, disclose it when it's relevant to do so. So when you go to publish the manuscript, say, hey, yeah, like the sentence structure was edited using ChatGPT. Now, one of the important things is that we're not using AI writing assistants to come up with our ideas and to write our papers and to come up with the actual intellectual property. Because that, as you can see, the process is you were the person that went through and came up with the bullet points for problem, gap, and hook. We're just using it to structure our ideas in clearly written English such that we get a first draft of it. And so really, that's why I think this is a very ethical and appropriate use of AI in writing because we're not using it to actually write the paper. We're using it to summarize our ideas and to help communicate those more clearly and more quickly. I would say that make sure that the voice of the content matches the remainder of your manuscript, aka your own voice. And so part of that is if you're one of the challenges is if you're using ChatGPT just for a paragraph at a time, the voice will change between different paragraphs. So my recommendation for that is to use a tool like ResubWrite or something that actually understands the context of your entire manuscript so that it automatically will match the voice of the rest of your manuscript. And then use AI to generate a first draft of your own ideas. Don't rely on AI to actually come up with new ideas because it really can't in many ways because generative AI is not this magical black box thing. It's essentially just taking data it's previously been trained on and coming up with stuff for you. And so it's hard for it to create de novo things and come up with de novo innovations. And that's your job as the researchers to figure all of that out. Don't blindly trust sources or references. I would say never trust references from AI at this point. I always verify and read the primary paper because you will be burned on hallucinations. It does a horrible job formatting references, for example. And then, as I mentioned before, don't rely on it to generate de novo ideas for publications. Great question. How do you cite AI in references? So typically you don't need to cite the use of AI in the reference section. It's often a declaration you need to make when you're publishing your manuscript. And there will be a section that says use of generative AI, and you just write ChatGPT was used to help structure the output of the manuscript. However, the authors maintain all responsibility for the intellectual property and ideas. What are the negatives of using AI for your papers? You know what? I'd say that initially when AI first came out, I would say that it was kind of viewed as a bad thing because people were like, oh, AI, it's not the author's work. I think now transparent declaration of AI is certainly becoming more acceptable and more common. And I don't think it discredits the paper because as long as the ideas are your own and the ideas are valid and it's kind of novel information, there shouldn't be an issue. The one challenge I think I see when people are using AI is for reviews. So if you're writing just a review paper where you're not actually even doing a systematic review, you're literally just giving an update on a topic. if I feel, and I sometimes read reviews as a peer reviewer, if I feel like the paper is just like ChatGPT's take on a topic and it's just outlining generic stuff, I will typically reject those papers because it's not actually contributing any unique insights. If you're writing a review in the era of AI, you should be at the cutting edge of that field and be able to offer contributions and ideas that really nobody else can in the field um, based on your significant experience, because otherwise you're just kind of doing the job of what ChatGPT could do, which doesn't really merit publication, in my opinion. Thinking a couple more questions. Do you have to disclose to publishers how you used AI in your manuscript? Absolutely. And so I just normally put that in as a statement in my manuscript when I'm writing it. All right. So what are some giveaways that the content of a manuscript is definitely AI generated? So heavy use of hyperbolic language, like things like transformative or um, I wish I had other examples off the top of my head. I'm sure I could just get ChatGPT to write anything. Just look on LinkedIn, essentially, with all the AI-driven responses on LinkedIn, and essentially anything that sounds like a LinkedIn post or a LinkedIn reply is probably AI-driven. So that would be one thought. The use of these M dashes with which are kind of the wide dashes. AI loves them, they really do. There's a theory that the reason why I don't know if this is true at all, but there's a theory that one of the reasons why OpenAI and ChatGPT loves using M dashes is that Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI or one of the founders of OpenAI, he uses them a lot in his writing. So maybe it would like somehow made it into the kernel of early ChatGPT. I don't believe that theory, but if you look at his writing from like back in the day when he was at Y Combinator, he used a lot of these M dashes in his writing. So that's just kind of interesting. Um, so sometimes, and I've seen this before, where people accidentally include parts of the prompt response in their manuscripts or other writing, where it'll be like, would you like me to generate another draft of this in a different tone for you? And so somebody will have like a text of their own, but then they've actually copied and pasted like very sloppily and included these random, clearly like ChatGPT generated phrases in their manuscript. I would be very careful of doing that. And if you are using AI, please be responsible with that. And then often, if you don't, and so if you don't prompt the AI specifically enough, or if you just say, hey, write me an introduction to go with a manuscript on X, Y, or Z, but you provide it no more information, you'll see that there's a lot of words and a lot of phrases and sentences, but they don't really say much. It's a really repetitive or circular argument that isn't really specific because if you don't provide the specificity as the person controlling the AI isn't very good at providing specificity itself. Again, AI is not magic. AI will take your ideas and help put it into well-written English, but it can't come up with those ideas on their own. Um, what is a good app or way to do grammar check? I mean, Grammarly is a very popular app to check grammar. I think they have a free version that's pretty good as well, and then they have a paid version as well. ReSubWrite, for what it's worth, we have a grammar spelling kind of check as well that we're implementing. But so lots of different ways. All right, all right. So we have done our literature search and come up with the bullet points under problem, gap, and hook. We have now even either written those ourselves or given those to AI. Now we have to review what was written for us and we have to edit it in our own voice to add clarity to it, to make sure it's actually accurate. And we have to add citations. And the important thing is because we provided the facts in the bullet pointed list with the citations, it should be very easy to identify the phrase that you provided, the statistics. 40% of patients with septic shock in the ICU die with citation number one. And you should very easily be able to see that statement and add the reference that you had already looked up. Don't rely on anything that an AI agent has given you because it may be hallucinated. And then send it over to co-authors for some feedback. Um, Next tip for this is use a reference manager from the get-go. The reason why we use a reference manager from the get-go is because it very, very easily allows you to keep track of what are you citing. It builds your reference list from the get-go, so you don't have to do it at the end. If you edit things around and move things around, the order of the references doesn't break. I recommend Zotero. It's free, it's easy to use, it works really, really well. You just download it for your Word document, and then you have a little plugin that you can add references in. So please use a reference manager. I would say that people who don't use a reference manager in 2025, it's a red flag to me as a collaborator or researcher because it's just such an easy thing to do that saves hours. So anyone who's not doing that, I kind of question like, why are you doing research if you're not willing to invest in the very basic tool of the trade, which is it's free. So it takes about 5 minutes to download. So please do this. It'll save you hours per manuscript. And in 2025, there's really no excuse not to use reference managers for your writing. All right, so I see some more questions in the chat, and I'll get to those in a second. But I'm going to pause here and see if there's any more questions. What are the most common mistakes when writing a protocol? I mean, a lot of the mistakes that we're talking about now, I'd say that the biggest mistake is that people devalue the importance of writing a protocol. Writing a protocol for any research study is probably the most important part because, as I mentioned in the last webinar, it is the recipe by which we are going to develop our methods, how we're going to collect data, how we're going to analyze our results. It is the protocol is the study in many ways. Once a protocol is done and perfected, all you have to do is hand it off to somebody and say, go do this. And the study will be great because your protocol will be great. Now, your results might not be positive, your results might be negative. That is the science, not the protocol, but at least it will be carried out in a scientifically rigorous way that regardless of whether it's positive or negative, will be able to be published and be a valuable contribution to science. All right. Well, I did mention that this webinar will be shorter, so we'll just go through this and then kind of answer any final questions. So bringing this all together. So I took when I was planning this out, I wanted to do a problem, a gap, and a hook. I took all my bullet points and then I put them, actually in this case, because this protocol was written pre-ChatGPT, I just took my bullet points and wrote out the problem, wrote out the gap, wrote out the hook. They were all cited kind of with an appropriate citation manager from the get-go. That way it's really easy to update and to keep track of the reference list and to ensure that citations are accurate. And then I just kept going from there in terms of writing the methods, writing the results, writing the discussion. When I write a research protocol, I actually start with the introduction. And the reason why is as you're reading the background literature, you will start thinking about, oh, these authors, they didn't consider this. Like maybe we should collect that data. Or, oh, interesting. Like I thought nobody had done that before, but these authors already kind of answered that. But the way they answered it wouldn't have been the way that I'd answer it. So maybe we'll do this instead. So it'll help start actually informing the methods and the research questions that you want to answer. So let me share my screen one more time. Sorry for the yo-yoing of screens back and forth here. All right. And so I guess with this, we'll leave you with a bit of a challenge for this week's kind of webinar series. And so please screenshot this. Jen is going to be sending this out as well. But if you are following along and want to help actually get practice writing a protocol, which is the whole purpose of this webinar series, don't just listen, don't just come to these lectures, don't just watch the recordings. Please participate and actually work alongside us because this is not something that you can learn just by passively doing. It is an active process. And so what I would challenge you to do is write an introduction for some sort of research question or protocol that you want to study or you would theoretically want to study, or even just an area that you want to learn more about because there could be an opportunity in that area, and write an introduction using the problem gap hook approach. Let's review the literature. So read however many studies you want, really kind of bullet points under the problem, the gap, and the hook. So the problem being like what are we trying to solve here? What is missing from the literature? And then how does our research study that we're going to write fit into that? So what is the objective of the research? try using a large language model like ChatGPT or Claude, some sort of free one or paid, whatever you want, and turn those bullet points into nicely structured paragraphs, and then actually review those and add in the citations that you'd previously identified before and post that on the Facebook group so that if you're feeling courageous enough, and Jen and I would love to give kind of written feedback on things to improve. And if we get 100 different ones posted, we will probably only do the first 10 or 15, but we'll try to get to as many as we can and provide kind of thoughtful comments on how to improve your writing and how to improve your research protocol. The whole purpose of this is to collaborate together, and so I really want to emphasize that we're here to support you and to help with your writing and to be there, answer questions. So please capitalize on this time and this opportunity. Um, and so with that, I'll answer any more questions, but we'll take off. So Rena's just asking kind of about the workflow here. So I'd say that the workflow that I would do is think about what research question that you want to answer, which hopefully you done last week, but if not, do it this week. Then create the 3 paragraphs: problem, gap, and hook. Make bullet points under problem, bullet points under gap, bullet point under hook, and then either write the paragraphs yourself and put it into ChatGPT after, or just put it into ChatGPT to write the paragraphs, or just write it yourself and don't use a large language model. The reason why I am emphasizing the use of kind of AI and large language models is I think that if you're using it in a way that is augmenting your existing process and not replacing it, it actually is a great teacher on how to write. And so if you're new to academic writing, I feel like it can help structure your ideas, and then over time you'll learn from it. So as long as you're not relying on it to replace your writing and your thinking, but just augmenting it. Clara says, is there an AI tool to check formatting of the protocol for assistance, please? So I don't think you need to really check formatting of the protocol because the formatting for the protocol is less important. So if you use any of the manuscript templates, which are linked in the QR code there, they all kind of have a general format for a protocol that should be acceptable. And then when you actually go to format your manuscript for a different journal, that's a different thing. And that's actually what our app resub.app does, is it helps automatically format your manuscript for any journal that you want to publish in. But not you don't need to do that for a protocol because the protocol you're just going to publish online. If you look at the last week's recording on Prospero, clinicaltrials.gov, or my favorite, Open Science Framework, OSF. Any other questions?